Hello, everyone, and a very warm welcome again. James Williams, Director of Programs with MEF. We heard the truth about CPaaS. Whether you call yourselves a CPaaS provider, whether you say you do Omnichannel, whether you say you do multi-channel, whether you say you do contact center as a service, CCaaS, or your UCaaS, or whatever it is, at the end of the day, the fact is that so many of you, your salaries, your wages, your mortgages, your rents are being paid by SMS. SMS is clearly very, very powerful. We heard that from Nick Lane. Now, if you've got a very, very powerful channel, which is bringing in your bacon, it's your bread and butter, it's clearly going to become a very, very big, nice, juicy, fat target for the bad actors out there. And that has indeed been the case. The past couple of years has seen a massive increase in SMS volumes globally. Some of the very big messaging companies have come out very openly with their statistics on traffic numbers and how big SMS plays for them in their messaging stack. So SMS is here to stay. And the key takeaway really from Nick's session before, he mentioned that just 7% of companies use SMS. And I remember when he introduced our business messaging event in Amsterdam in June, he talked about the fact that there were, I think, just over 305 million listed companies in the world. So if you go to the official company registrars in the various countries around the world, top those up, total it up, you get to over 300 million companies. And now it's just 7% are using SMS. So there is vast potential. And we're going to be talking about this topic. We're going to be talking about the fraud element. And I'd like to introduce now my speakers to the stage. First of all, Mr. Vladimir Smal from LANCK Telecom. Vladimir, welcome.
Hello. Hello. Can you hear me?
Vladimir is kindly sponsoring this session. This is a LANCK Telecom sponsored session. You are personally with your credit card.
Yes.
He likes getting the points, as I do, on my credit card. So Vladimir has a very unusual role in the industry. I know he's spoken a number of times on panels of mine, and I keep saying the same thing, but it is a very, very unusual role insofar that he manages both the sales and the procurement of messaging with LANCK. And of course, SMS is a huge component of your messaging. So very warm welcome. Please take a seat, if you could there. Let's leave the one at the far end free for me. And I'll just introduce other speakers as well, but who will be coming on stage as well after Vladimir has done his presentation. Sorry, that's a fail from me, because Vladimir is doing your presentation. I've got him sitting down. He can sit down for a minute. We're going to be having Kevin Graham from Vonage, who manages all operator services with Vonage, which was formerly Nexmo, but is now Ericsson. So lots of changes. Kevin has a very, very interesting background. He, believe it or not, we've got the World Cup on. He actually managed a national team, a national football team. In his past, he's a very, very keen football fan, worked for a mobile operator, so bringing some great background. We've got Tim Biddle coming on as well a bit later. Tim works with Sinch now, but managing the UK operator relationships. And guess what? He worked for one of the UK operators before as well. And joining us online will be Simon Nainkin, who manages the VP of all product side of things with Clickatell, based in South Africa. But first of all, to set the scene, apologies, I made you sit down, Vladimir, but you can get one extra step or 2 or 3 extra steps in there. We've got Vladimir to set the scene with the major problems around A2P SMS artificial traffic generation. Thank you. And sorry about that.
Okay. Hello, everyone. Great to be here in person. Last year, unfortunately, couldn't join. So it's great to be there, and we're happy to present this important topic during MEF events. So it's not the first time that I'm speaking about the generated traffic. So in June, in Amsterdam, there was a hybrid event by MEF called MEF Business Messaging, right? At that very event, I had the presentation, which was called A New Dawn in SMS Generation Game. So some of you did see it, some of you didn't. So I'm gonna briefly explain what is it all about, and then also share some of the stats that we at LANCK Telecom as a active company in anti-fraud have gathered over the last 12 months. Yeah, so let's probably start. Okay. So there is a brilliant document that is called MEF Business SMS Fraud Framework that has been published by MEF in 2016. And it's in version 3, I think. So as James mentioned yesterday, there is a plan to update it and publish a version 4 next year. So we hope we will also make our own contribution to this document as an active member. Now, this document describes the way that the traffic is obviously being served by the players within the ecosystem. So there is a SMS ecosystem map, which you can see right now. It shows the major players within the business ecosystem, which are from our part side, the enterprise, the businesses, the brands that actually originating the traffic, then the different types of messaging providers or aggregators, MNOs, obviously, and the consumer. There's also the supporting companies like firewall providers or testing companies. This is number 5. Now, the document also describes the four major objectives of fraud, and these being the identity theft, when the identity is being stolen, the information, the data that could be used in the fraudulent actions. Then there is a data theft, when the information to access the financial bank accounts is being hacked. Commercial exploitation, which is about gaining competitive advantage to win a better position within the market. And then the network and system manipulation, which is about gaining competitive advantage by the manipulation of message or by bypassing the protection measures that MNOs have. The document describes itself the 14 fraud types, and they are all of those types. They have one of those objective at the main one. So you can see here most of the fraud scenarios that most of you, I'm sure, are well aware of, like phishing or spoofing, gray routes, non-interworking routes, SIM farm, spam, etc., etc. So we at LANCK have noticed that there is one of the fraud scenarios that is missing within the framework, and which we can see happening more and more frequent in our business, which we call artificial generation of traffic, or AGT. And I'm going to show you how it works and how it looks. Well, as you know, the major driver for anti-fraud measures in the mobile ecosystem is obviously mobile operators. So for this specific type of fraud, MNOs are not really active to do anything, because in reality, those messages are rarely hitting their network, at least if they are not the bad actor themselves. So here it is. Artificial generation of traffic is about faking and one-time password request, one-time password messages that all of us are using when going through a 2FA or getting a code from a bank or whatever. So in a normal situation, the consumer would request an OTP from an enterprise, from a bank or whatever. And then this OTP will be sent by enterprise to one of his messaging providers, be it CPaaS platform or aggregator or whatever, who then should send it to MNO, and then that's how the consumer gets the message. Okay, this is the ideal story. So what happens now is some fraudsters, they are initiating the message on behalf of consumer using some either like number ranges or even some random numbers. Then when they are within the chain of the messaging, they are able to receive those messages and terminate them themselves, faking the real registration procedure. So for this scheme to work, actually part of the traffic should be also terminated over the white channel. Otherwise, this will look very suspiciously. Obviously, the DLR and conversion rate on the part of the traffic that has been terminated through a fraudster would reach almost 100%. So the CR will also look good. So we suspect that this type of fraud is used also in the cases when there is a high competition for any specific traffic that has been originated by big brands. So in order to, and you know that the way it works for OTTs, they measure CR, and based on CR, they would be choosing this or that provider to terminate their traffic. So when the CR looks better, even the algorithm might move the traffic to a different party. So in our case, it could be a fraudster. Now, the other reasons, obviously, why fraudsters are into it is because they can monetize the traffic from enterprise, or they can help to monetize certain number ranges or certain operator that is obviously interested in this revenue share scheme. So these are let's just summarize on the key features that this artificial SMS generation type of fraud has. So first of all, as I mentioned, it looks exactly like an OTP. So it doesn't look suspicious. It doesn't look like fraud. So those SMS only rarely might actually reach the consumer. I didn't tell it in the first place. So sometimes when the Roxo party acting as an aggregator, for example, is not receiving the traffic that they have actually initiated, so it might go the white channel, right, directly to a minority consumer. So in these cases, the consumers might receive an OTP that they have never requested. I'm sure some of you have experienced it yourself when out of nowhere you are getting a message from X application saying your code is this, and you're like, but I don't even have this application on my phone. I have never been registered there. So what is that? So this is it. This is when the chain is broken and the messages are going the wrong way. So yeah, coming back to the features. So those SMS messages that's been triggered by fraudster only occasionally reach the end users. So the main objective is to either monetize the traffic from enterprises, because enterprises many of them would be happy to pay for that. They see there is more traffic, there is more revenues, showing some good numbers in engagement or whatever. Then monetization of certain number ranges or MNO and MVNO ranges, winning the traffic in the competition. As I mentioned, the CR will look better on those routes in many cases. So that's a way to win the traffic, and probably subsidizing the cost. We did speak about that before, that the SMS rates are coming up actually. So it's becoming more and more difficult for aggregator to actually sell SMS at those prices. And what can be done is, if you route part of the traffic or generate some traffic on top, then you would reach a better cost and you will be able to provide a lower rate to your customer. And that's how that's one of other reasons why we see that this generation is becoming more and more popular, let's say. Now, obviously that enterprises and brands are paying for fake consumers, and aggregators might be stuck in between, because when some of the big guys realize that this traffic is actually fake, and they would say, okay, we're not willing to pay for that because there is no real consumers behind. It will be, I mean, the aggregator will be stuck between paying their vendor and not receiving a payment from their customer, because as most of the SMS interworking agreement says, the aggregators have to pay per submitted, regardless of whether this traffic, whether this SMS has been actually delivered or not, right? So that's a risk for an aggregator, for the messaging providers. And as I said, since this traffic is normally not reaching the MNOs, so MNO firewalls do not detect, as we think, this type of fraud, unless, as I said, the MVNO or MNO is a bad actor themselves. So what are the reasons that we see why there is more and more generation happening in the market? So first of all, there is more and more players. The SMS business, the A2P SMS business is a very, let's say, it's a growing market, and it's a very tempting market to enter, especially for some company that's been, for example, in other telecom businesses, like voice as an example. So there's more and more revenues because the rates are growing. So, and then it's obviously the competition is quite high. So for some newcomers, that might be a way to actually, you know, find their niche within the market and gain the traffic. Yeah, here it is. A2P SMS rates are constantly growing. That's not our news, I think, for most of you here. And the monetization deals that operators close are becoming bigger and bigger. Well, there's obviously a natural growth of SMS, but I think that in many cases the deals that have been closed by operators, their targets are actually far higher than what the real traffic is. So that's actually triggers to generate more traffic, as we think. And then, yeah, there's high competition for big band traffic. That's why sometimes this generation is used in order to be more competitive. So as I promised, we at LANCK Telecom, as an active anti-fraud provider, has gathered some stats over the last 12 months on the traffic that's been actually sent through us as an aggregator. So around 6% of all A2P SMS traffic that we have terminated was flagged in our system as generated. If we talk about revenue, there will be much more, because in most cases the destination that have been hit by generation are the high cost destinations. So for some brands, the percentage of generation traffic might reach 30 and even 60%. I mean, obviously this is our data, right? So I'm not telling you that this is the overall, the 100% correct, accurate data, but I think it's giving an indication of what is actually happening, how severe those cases might be. So for some networks, as we see it, I mean, MNOs and MVNO, the percentage of generated traffic might reach 50 or even 60, 70, even 80%. From the top networks that we see, like in our analysis, like 7 out of top, where more than 50% of traffic was marked as fraud, have a single provider, single messaging provider, and 30% of networks where fraud prevails over genuine traffic are small MNOs and MVNOs with a subscriber base of less than 100K users. Now, obviously, this is impacting a lot our business, the whole ecosystem, and there's direct financial losses that that enterprise and aggregators might get from this fraud. Obviously, there's a reputational damage as well. The customers' trust in SMS as a channel, as a business, messaging channel, is declining. The quality of service, I mean, it might look good, but in reality, it's not great. There is tough and unfair competition, and then at some point there should be some legal intervention into this in order to settle those cases, which is never that good, I think, for the industry, because when there is a lot of regulation, it's the product itself is becoming less attractive to the consumers, to the customers, to the brands, right? So they might be looking at some alternative which is easier to use, and that might be also the reason why the alternative channels like OTT, WhatsApp, and RCS might take part of the traffic from SMS, which doesn't look as good as it was in the beginning. So that's it for me, from my side for today.
Thank you, Vladimir. So if you would take your seat where you were before, yeah. It was a few minutes early before, all thanks to me. Kevin, would you like to join us, please? Thank you. Great to see you. Thank you. And Tim, come on down.
Thank you very much.
Welcome. Lovely. I'll have a seat as well. Far end. And hopefully we should have Simon remotely. We do. Simon.
Hello. Hello, everyone. Thank you for having me.
Hello, great to see you, and great having Clickatell as part of the MEF community now as well. And good seeing you in Africa, in Cape Town, a couple of weeks ago.
Thank you. Likewise, James.
Great. So would you like to start by introducing yourself? Simon, let's go with you over in Cape Town. Introduce yourself, your company, what you do.
Great. I'm Simon Nainkin, VP of Product Partnerships. I oversee our carrier partnerships, a large part of our SMS customer relationships that we have with our large brands, and I work in the product and sales divisions within Clickatell, close with our customers and carrier partners.
Lovely. So I know you've been with Clickatell a decade now, I think 10 years now, and you had a financial services background. You were an entrepreneur yourself. So you used messaging, I'm sure. And moving on, Tim, sitting next to me, go for it.
Thank you. Yeah, so Tim Biddle, operator relations at Sinch, focused predominantly on UK and Ireland. So I guess 2.5 years in Sinch now. Across that time, as well as operator relations, a lot of time focused on fraud, so hence this discussion today. And previous to my time with Sinch, as you mentioned earlier, 12 years at one of the UK operators as well. So keen interest in this conversation today and seeing if we can try and tidy up some of the current industry issues.
Fantastic. I know you're from the UK, obviously you're looking after the UK relationships, but Sinch is a global player, so
big global player,
a global feel to the discussion as well.
Absolutely, yes.
Fantastic. And Kevin, yourself.
Thanks, James. Kevin Graham, I work in operator services at Vonage. We've recently been acquired by Ericsson, so you'll probably see a little bit more reference to Ericsson over time, and there's some interesting dynamics around that. My background, I've been with the business for 18 months. Previously, I was with SMS Highway, an aggregator, and before that, an operator for 10 years. So not quite as long as your 12-year stint, Tim, but similar pathway. My responsibilities extend to working closely with operators on some of the subjects that we can talk about today. Trying to work on the strategy, on I guess assuring this product set as best we can. But there's some really interesting work that we're obviously doing, perhaps as a result of the Ericsson piece as well. So looking forward to 2023 on that front. But yeah, that's me.
Fantastic. And Vladimir has introduced himself. Well, do you want to go your background?
Yeah. So my name is
before
Vladimir.
LANCK as well.
My name is Vladimir Smal. So I'm, as James mentioned, head of sales and procurement for global messaging at LANCK Telecom. So my background is actually LANCK. So I've been with LANCK for now 14 years, and I started with the voice division, and at that time we were only doing wholesale voice. So I have good expertise in the voice business. And then 4 years back, I moved to the messaging department within the company. And we also very much, as you probably figured out, active in anti-fraud solutions. We have done a great job on the voice side, and now we're working to develop a similar solution for SMS.
I think it's an important thing. So many players are moving from the voice to the SMS world, and so much of the fraud we talk about in the industry, we talk a lot about SMS SIM farms and things like that. Actually, that's old. That's nothing new, because voice got there many years before SMS in terms of fraud. And the two are actually meeting now in the world of A2P voice flash, but that's another panel for a different day. That's a different topic. We could talk for an hour about that alone. Simon, Vladimir mentioned that 6% of the traffic LANCK carried was recognized as being artificially generated. What are you seeing within your business, Clickatell, and your real region of expertise, of course, is Africa. So what's happening in the African market? What's happening within your business with this phenomenon?
Yeah, just a small correction there. We're a global company and we serve, global brands.
Yeah.
So we see this as a global phenomenon and trend that's happening. The number that Vlad quoted, 6%, I'm surprised to see that within his data it is so low. But what we have seen and what we have experienced is that the fraud seems to occur in a limited set of markets, and it seems to move on in pockets of 10 or 12 markets. And we can actually correlate this to where new firewall deployments are happening at the time of expiry or renewal. So it seems cyclical along with some of the commercial events that take place in the value chain.
So the commercial model with A2P SMS, there's a real direct correlation with A2P SMS commercial model increasing, particularly perhaps on the international side of things, and higher incidences of this artificial traffic generation.
So I think we firewall proliferation has been on the increase, and with firewall proliferation comes along the addition of the fraud. And that is also what's driving some of the A2P volumes in some markets going way above the country normal growth rates. So in certain markets, which are sort of that have yet to be firewalled, we're actually seeing fraud rates or brands, saying that the fraud rates are in excess of 50%, which is really concerning for the industry, because that it sends a bad message out about the ecosystem, and brands are just not going to pay increasing A2P rates, especially when this is a illicit fraud traffic.
Tim, coming to you, what's happening in the UK? Because if you're looking around the world, you're seeing from a commercial model perspective, it could be viewed that the UK is perhaps more reasonably priced, that mid-level in respect to the market. Are you seeing big issues with this in the UK?
I'll go with +44 number ranges. I'll broaden it out a bit.
Yeah.
So +44s, yes, we are seeing issues in the +44s and in the UK as well. I'd say the motivations are slightly different. So it's not firewall-driven deployments. I absolutely agree there are firewall-driven issues, but it's more lease number ranges. So number range owners getting payouts in revenue share for mobile operators. It would be simple to stop. Don't pay a revenue share on A2P messaging as an operator. You would wipe it out overnight. But that's what operators have. So you're right, it's a lower priced market. It's a very high volume market. So I guess people think it's easier to fly under the radar with the volumes they're sending through. But when you dig into it and look at the patterns of certain traffic, there's some significant volumes of generated traffic within the +44 number ranges.
What could operators do in terms of commercial model do? When you say if they change their commercial model, that could be what could they do?
Well, so I spoke to one UK operator a couple of days ago who gave me that slight light bulb moment of very simple in their case. If a message comes into them on an A2P route, they don't pay a revenue share. If it comes in on the P2P route, they do pay a revenue share. So, okay, you might have P2P AIT. We'll ignore that for this conversation. But on the A2P route, should there ever be a legitimate need for an operator to pay a revenue share to a number range owner or a number range leaser for an A2P message? I can't see any legitimate reason for them to need to pay that. If someone's got that number range, they've got it because it's facilitating a business function that they're having, second line services and so on. They shouldn't be expecting such a volume of A2P that a lack of revenue share payment would make a difference to their business. So I'd say a very simple model would be don't pay revenue share on A2P traffic.
Okay, there you have it. Really simple. Keep it simple.
Keep it simple. Yep.
Absolutely.
This probably is the simplest solution though. And when they do see issues, obviously don't pay out and claw back their payments if you've made payments on this kind of traffic. But they need help evidence in the problems, I'd say.
Okay, thank you. And Kevin, your take on what's going on and how big do you see it? Because I've heard of some providers actually talking about this issue being in the 20% plus level. I know for specific brands you're talking over 50%. Vladimir, you're talking between 30 and 60. Simon as well, very big percentages, over half. But could it be really that 20% of the market that Nick was talking about, these transactions actually is artificially generated, or would that be too high? What do you think?
No, it could. It could. I'd say what we're seeing is consistent with what all of the guys have mentioned here in terms of the that level of impact on the industry. I think from my side of things have changed an awful lot in the last year. If you look at the way that all of these is, you have to consider the motivation for the fraudsters, and you have to consider the commercial decisions that might have led to those. So the structure of the operator agreements, the freedom that CPaaS players have to increase prices. I think you have to look at the deployment of security systems for every player within the ecosystem as well. So obviously at the operator level, but within the CPaaS players as well. We're talking about the UK there, we also recognise there's a huge issue around consumer fraud. We've talked about it before on these panels. And if you put all of this together, it doesn't paint a particularly positive picture. That said, we also need to look at some of the stuff that Nick mentioned before in terms of where the industry is heading, where the opportunities are, that 93% of businesses that still aren't using SMS. If we can tidy up our act, and that's no small task, because you need to affect all of the elements within the ecosystem. And I've advocated before that I think you have to maybe go region by region or even country by country to start to have impact, because to try and apply the same model globally, we're all global businesses up here. It's the fragmentation that exists in the industry means it's so difficult. We invest more and more every year on compliance, on process, on the operational processes that underpin this industry, and yet to me it seems like the fraudsters are evolving at a similar pace, if not quicker. So these are very real challenges. I think everyone in the room, there's lots of familiar faces in here, and everyone in the room will see it from their perspective. But everything that the guys have mentioned is these guys are dealing with some of the biggest brands in the world, as are we, and we want to build confidence. We need to do some work on this.
Fantastic. Now, Vladimir, in your presentation, you mentioned that first of all, it was difficult or perhaps probably impossible for MNOs to actually detect this type of traffic. It's the first thing my takeaway from that. But then you mentioned specifically 6%. How did you as LANCK detect that 6% was artificially generated?
Yeah, thank you, James. So first, I would like to mention why the 6% might look not that high figure for us specifically, because actually our focus is to terminate traffic over direct routes to mobile operators. As I mentioned, this traffic is mostly happening on the routes with like single gateway providers or smaller operators, and that's probably where we are not connected directly, right? So when we are terminating traffic over direct routes, you don't see that much generated traffic happening. We have an in-house system, like based on our AI, that is who we feed on a daily basis with cases, and then this system can reciprocate those algorithms and can form a new see the sequences and then make a decision on whether this specific case looks suspicious or not. When the system is alerting us, then we'll be checking each case and see if it's really generated traffic or just it looks like generated traffic, and will be given back the reply to the system, and then that's how it is, self-educates on this specific issue. Yeah, so I think that our figures are pretty accurate. We already started to with a number of our close partners to, let's say, communicate on those specific cases, like opening them a trouble ticket or informing the commercial representatives about those specific cases, so that they deliver the message to the customer, to the brand. Unfortunately, as of now, we don't see that much feedback back from the consumers. As of now, it might seem that the issue is not that critical in a way, so there's no that many major cases of non-payments from the enterprises. So that is why I think the fraudsters are feeling themselves quite comfortable as well, because they are getting their money. One thing that I wasn't to mention, that basically this scenario might happen in any network in the world. So it doesn't necessarily comes with let's say with firewall. With the places where the single aggregator has placed by firewall, but those destinations are quite comfortable because let's say to work with, since there's just one provider. So if you are sending part of the traffic to this one and you take a part of that on your generation machine, then it's easier just to enable this whole scheme to be working.
Okay, thank you. Simon, how are you and Clickatell going about tackling this whole issue of artificially generated traffic? And what are you doing about communicating potential pitfalls or anything around this issue to enterprises, that this actually exists? Because this can have a real big impact unknowingly on some of them.
Yeah, very much so, James. I think, being part of MEF for a start and creating awareness within our ecosystem players to build a stronger voice towards this topic. So that would be sort of, our first port of call and why we're here today, why I'm here today. Secondly, I think the application of technology, applying machine learning is sort of now par for the course, being able to detect this right up front so that it's not part of your supply chain is now sort of the expected delivery service model that one needs to provide. Comes at additional costs, technology costs to deploy, but that's the cost of doing business. So back in a few years ago, where it was just good enough to have good Rails, excellent enterprise support, now you're having to deploy very sophisticated algorithms to go and detect, sort of 39 attempts OTP request to the same number, for example, when at an application level that is not even allowed, just as one example. So, and really that's what we can do, is only we receive, the messages, and they're obviously being inserted into the value chain outside of the system. So, our job is to sort of, spread this message and to ensure we can build better compliance, regulatory frameworks, and fraud awareness.
Thank you. So I suppose it's now a question really to all my panelists here. In order to have a very, very healthy ecosystem, we've got representatives from some of the largest players in the world. We've got Sinch, Vonage, Ericsson, Clickatell. We've got so many of the key players sitting in the room right here. But to have a healthy ecosystem, we've got to have smaller and medium-sized players as well. And Vladimir, in your presentation, you explained the risks very simply, that simply could be a larger player will not pay the smaller player because they've detected it's artificially generated. That could potentially destroy so many businesses, not just hurt them, but actually destroy them, make their business unviable from one day to the next. If we're talking about hundreds of thousands or possibly even several million messages, how realistic is it for the small and medium-sized players in the ecosystem, so the aggregators out there, to have the technology that can detect this? What can be done? Because we need those smaller players out there in the regions as well to actually service this huge growth potential within SMS. What can we do?
It's funny.
This to all of you. Yeah.
It's funny. Nick talked before about consolidation, one of the two C's that driving sort of industry dynamics, and actually I think the consolidation phase is over. And I actually think that the fragmentation of the industry, and back to the regional differences I was talking about before, this gives rise to the opportunity for smaller players with really good local knowledge. Now, the key is really about your due diligence and your commercial judgment when you work with these partners. So some small partners can provide huge value to larger players, larger global players. In terms of the amount that they have to invest, I think there are now cloud-based solutions out there that theoretically, as part of that due diligence process, you would expect them to be able to demonstrate they conform to at least some framework that looks to deal with fraud, that looks to deal with, sustainable commercial models. So I would encourage that. I actually feel like, as one of the bigger providers, some of the real value in, particularly in specific regional,
So you could include it as perhaps in some form of code of conduct or something like that. So an accredited code of conduct.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, we've got to deal with a lot of regulation already. So I come back to the cost of this business, of running this business now. But I do think there are some kind of one size fits all kind of guidelines that I think a lot of us already work to those, within our own corporate governance structures anyway. But yeah, I agree.
So Simon, you don't have the benefit of actually seeing us, being in front of us and being with us. I'm looking at you on the screen, even though you're not looking at me on the screen. But what's your take on it? Do you agree? Kevin, that's realistic?
I do agree with Kevin, but I have a narrative that I'd like to sort of just present here, in that we heard earlier in the earlier session on Nick Lane and the growth of CPaaS and SMS being a large part of that. And I really feel that the level of fraud that is happening is putting the entire SMS channel at risk. Now, that's a really large and bold statement to make, but it's got to do with how big brands invest in markets. If you look at some of the large online, social media applications, they're investing their money and make their investments based on, the ad revenue received per user. When you go and artificially inflate a market by 20, 30, 40% in terms of net new registrations and that, it sends a false signal that that market is growing. And guess what? When the ad revenue doesn't present itself in the financial results that are presented at the end of the year, everybody's losing out, and the net investment will flow out of the country, out of channels. And then we are starting to look at alternative channels outside of SMS, because in some markets today we are seeing termination rates of 25 cents, US cents, for an OTP message. And I don't know how sustainable that type of termination rate is for the industry. So the level of fraud is much bigger than that. It's that it has the potential to impact other ecosystems and value chains.
Okay, thank you. Tim, anything to say? Because we need to move to the questions then. And it's the break. These good people are going to get something to eat and drink.
Yeah, I mean, I get, so your point of the smaller players. So I think, as Vladimir said, the MEF fraud framework doesn't cover this issue at the moment, but I think there are some guidelines we can put out there. So if I look at like my role within Sinch, it's more of a procurement role, buying off of those operators. So there's one example from last month where we had a customer who had some AIT to a value of €250,000. So in that kind of scenario, we need to be quite bold as procurement teams going to our suppliers, regardless as to what the contract might say, and making it clear we're not going to pay for this kind of business. And the smaller players have no more or less chance of succeeding in that approach. But if we all do it and we're all saying to the, this could be an end mobile operator, right, I need to change my T's and C's. Actually, as an operator, this is now something you're going to have to accept. If I can evidence this is fraudulent traffic, we will not handle fraudulent money and we're not going to pay you for this. And in that scenario, actually, it was easier than I thought. The operator was quite understanding. Okay, yeah, this is good. And some of the things operators ask for, which we can consider in, say, MEF guidance, is, okay, so if you don't pay for this traffic, I want evidence from you that everyone up the value chain hasn't paid for this traffic. So the first person at the top of the chain who was defrauded gets the money back. Because if I just don't charge you, but you sit in the middle, then you've got the fraudulent money instead. So there's some real processes or at least guidelines we can put in place through MEF, for example, which say, in this scenario, here's what you do. Here's how you could evidence that the entire chain has now received their refund or their credit and so on. So it's easy for a big or a small player, in my opinion, to have that kind of conversation.
Well, Vladimir was mentioning that we're going to be, or members, it's member-led, members will be changing the SMS fraud framework, moving that from version 3 to 4. But we also have our business SMS code of conduct, which is version 2. And I suspect something along the lines of what you've just mentioned, Tim, and I may just have to rope you into that. Don't give yourself some work from Sinch, get Sinch's name into that. The code of conduct will need to be updated. Vladimir, final closing remark.
Yeah, just one comment to what Kais has already mentioned. We are already starting to actually add a clause regarding the artificial generated traffic within our SMS agreements. I think that's something that can actually legally help us to, to avoid those cases of issues. I mean, obviously, it will take time for especially bigger companies to adapt that kind of clauses. But I mean, if it's something that is helping everybody to have a more sustainable business and more sustainable ecosystem, I think that's a good thing that we should also all put our efforts on. So yeah.
Thank you very much. And Simon, thank you very much for joining us from South Africa. And we can see from the panel that this has potential to severely damage the credibility of SMS, and we as an industry need to act, but it's not that easy to detect it and everything like that. So thank you. Thank you, Simon. Thank you, Vladimir, Kevin, and Tim. I know we've got questions. I know I haven't forgotten. I'm just thanking them all before we go to questions in the room, because immediately after the questions go, people are going to be running out that way, I can tell you. So any questions in the room?
We have one online.
Go for it, Ross.
Pedro Gasper asks, what would be the main difference between artificial inflation of traffic and artificial generation of traffic?
Vladimir, so Pedro is one of my colleagues, so
Kevin,
and I know
it's about educating your team. Here we go.
I think that Pedro should go and first of all read the math business
framework
called framework, because it describes it perfectly. But I mean, for me, I think it's more about the looping of the traffic. The AIT is not about like the generation in this sense. It's a bit different one. So it's more like inflating the traffic by MO rather than MT. So it's a bit different scenario. But I think it's better to read the how it is described in the document.
I hadn't really considered that point until Pedro's question a few seconds ago. We've been referring to it as AIT because the traffic is inflated. It's inflated by generation. It's inflated traffic either way. So we've just called it a blanket AIT within Sinch. I guess AGT, because I saw it on your slide earlier. Artificially generated versus artificially inflated traffic. We could differ the terms. I'd just cover it all with it's fraudulent traffic that shouldn't exist. So we can split hairs on the G and the I. It probably doesn't make much difference.
We can really get going here.
Yeah, I mean, AGT is new to me as well when I saw it on your presentation, but I suppose the generated side of things could be around the MO and the number ranges and the benefits around there, whereas the inflation is about getting traffic levels in terms of overall international traffic being delivered into the subscriber base and inflating that across the market. I guess
I think to me, it's what Tim's mentioning. It's about those number ranges, bringing those number ranges into play. They're so great. The number ranges mobile operators offer to the industry are absolutely fantastic and helping to grow the business, but they're also a potential risk area.
And I think you can, one piece of advice would be identify the number ranges, which is easier said than done. When you're handling hundreds of millions of messages a month, you tend to look at the MNC. It's gone to this operator's MNC, it's operator X. If you actually start to break down the number ranges, which is hard when you're dealing with hundreds of millions of rows of data, and split out the first few digits, you start to see some really clear patterns of specific number ranges. Then you can just simply blanket block number ranges within a certain operator, which is what we do. But it's a lot of manual work to get to the number range point, and that's where the machine learning needs to come in.
Fantastic. That's it. So thank you very much indeed. Thanks, Ross, for fielding questions. Thank you very much, audience.